morning, everybody. I'm the VCCI CEO, Paul Guerra, and welcome to today's Victoria Business Together webinar. It's a cold and rainy morning in Melbourne on this day, April the 8th, and although it's Easter week, it does feel like winter rather than autumn, but I reckon that just continues the craziness of this year. The good news is the curve is flattening, and hopefully that means a return to normality sooner rather than later, and my guest today will have more to say on that. And just on that, I'm not long off the phone to the State Treasurer, Tim Pallas, and he has asked me to reinforce the need for social distancing. We're going well, but controlling, limiting, in fact zeroing community transmission now is the key to full recovery. Yesterday, Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced the rent relief package, which set out the mandatory code of conduct regarding leasing, an important step forward in helping ease the uncertainty confronting many of you in terms of commercial tenancies. The code probably doesn't resolve it completely, and we know we've heard from many landlords and tenants would like a bit more, but it does at least provide a platform for parties to reach agreement. We encourage landlords and tenants to keep their discussions going in an open and transparent way. We'll be watching JobKeeper legislation today, the debate that will ensue in Parliament, but we're pretty confident it'll go through. We've spoken to a lot about the nuts and bolts of the package last week, and we've spoken to a lot of people post that as well. We know this is going to be a great benefit for most businesses in Victoria, and we'll be most pleased when this goes through. I think one of the highlights of this has been when you look at the leadership that we're getting out of the Prime Minister, when you look at the leadership that we're getting out of the Premier, there's a willingness to listen and act, and that's been very much the case with the JobKeeper payments off the back of the advocacy that we're doing on your behalf. It's also great to see the commitment of all political parties to get this legislation planned and through so quickly, and it's a credit to everybody involved. There'll be debate today as appropriate, but I think we've seen from the opposition side what they're looking for, and we certainly understand from the government side what they're looking for. And I think it's been wonderful to see the unions, the governments and the employee groups coming together, which is just fantastic. So just on the webinar today, it'll be available for everybody to watch online after we finish today, but I appreciate everybody dialing in and being part of the live episode that we have today. For anyone that's not a member of the Victorian Chamber, please do so. www.victorianchamber.com.au. We've made memberships free, as hopefully you all know by now. It's a great way to get the resources that you need. Another great way is with our partner through this, Small Business Victoria, and they've got a wonderful resource on their website as well, which is www.business.vic.gov.au. So don't forget to visit those too. Now I'll move to today's discussion, and it's a lengthy discussion about how Australia is working to fight coronavirus and what we can expect over the next few months. What we want to do is start to flag what are the signs that you can expect to see to hopefully work your business back into some sense of normality. And my guest today is Professor Paul Wood, AO. I first met Paul around 12 months ago at a congress in Milan, Italy, which was focused on the future of food. We were there with Food and Wine Victoria, working with the state government to pull off a bold initiative which became Global Table. 12 months on, Milan and food security have a very different resonance in the wake of coronavirus. Paul Wood, AO, is a very notable Australian and has extensive experience in biotech in a number of roles. He was a Deputy Director of the CRC for vaccine technology for 7 years. Then he moved to join CSL, and then he moved to join Pfizer both in Australia and in the US. He's pioneered many different parts and then eventually returned home to Australia to become an adjunct professor at Monash University. In 2016, he was elected to the board of Guerra, Australia, and was also a consultant on the agricultural program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He is very much somebody that is well connected. He's become a close friend of mine, and he's someone who is able to speak on both coronavirus and beyond. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Paul, and thank you very much for the opportunity to chat to the Victorian industry.
It's a pleasure. We're getting a lot of information about coronavirus every day. In your view, how is coronavirus in Australia faring?
Yeah, look, I think we've had some good news. You know, you saw some of the stats came out from Canberra yesterday, but I just want to give a couple of figures that might highlight sort of what we've actually achieved in the last fortnight. So if we go back just 2 weeks to the 25th of March, we were tracking at 25% new cases per day. So every day, 25% new cases. If we kept that up, today, we would have had 67,000 cases. So that's what we were tracking 2 weeks ago. So today would have been 67,000 cases. Now, as you know, today is 6,000 cases. So social distancing has worked. It was 2 weeks ago that actually that was put in place. And we didn't know how it would go for at least a week or so. So that's the really good news. We're down now to about a 3% increase per day. And I think today's figures were about 188 new cases. So that's really dramatic. And why it's so important is if we'd kept on that projection of 25%, we would have overwhelmed our health system, you know, and that's something we just couldn't do. We just couldn't accept an overwhelming of our health system. That would have really rocked public confidence. So as much as some people probably thought 2 weeks ago we were being a bit harsh, it's really showed dividends. We have to continue that. We have to continue to drive that down. So we're seeing no new cases per day. But that's the really good news, is we've averted a major crisis. And, you know, I want to start with some really good news.
So, Paul, we're hearing and reading a lot of articles about potential treatments, some completely off the wall, it would seem. Others not so. And I know, speaking to the CSIRO yesterday, they're in a position where they're starting to test various vaccines. In your view, how will the vaccine be developed? And roughly, if we get it right, how long will it take?
All right, so again, some good news out there. So this is an international effort. So there are now over 50 approaches being looked at around the globe. All the major pharmaceutical companies, Sanofi, Novartis, Pfizer, SmithKline Beecham, are all working heavily, as well as a lot of research groups. So that's the first thing. Over 50 groups out there working to bring a vaccine through as fast as possible. The first vaccines that are going to come through are going to use conventional technology, because normally it would take probably around about 8 years to register a human vaccine from scratch. We haven't got 8 years, so we need to bring it through in the 12 to 18 months that people are talking about. And we can do that, but we can only do that using conventional technologies. The good news with this virus is conventional should work. We already actually make corona vaccines for cattle and for cats. So having been in the veterinary space, we made a couple of corona vaccines. So we actually know how to do that. So I'm confident we will have a vaccine. We must go through the steps, and you've heard the good news that 2 vaccines went into a ferret model at Geelong, at the CSIRO facility at Geelong 2 weeks ago. They will be challenged in 2 weeks' time to know what level of protection those animals have. We've also seen the first vaccine in the US go into humans, and the stage 1 is really just to test safety. So things are moving quickly. There's a lot of people at work. The Gates Foundation is coordinating a lot of that activity. And one of the things that will determine how long it takes is manufacturing. The manufacturing is always the point. If we have to validate a new process, we just don't have the time. And that's why I say it'll have to be conventional technology, and I'm confident that conventional vaccine technology will work. It'll be the first phase, but we'll have later vaccines as well.
What sort of time frame, Paul, if we found a vaccine today, by the time it goes through those trials for public use, is it 12 months? Is it 6 months?
Well, let's just take, so let's assume the first one that's into humans now. So the safety will be a pretty short period of time. If that looks promising, then we'll get expedited approval for phase 2 trials. We will start looking at the immunogenicity and efficacy. And if that's promising, I'm going to guess that they'll start the scale up of manufacture as they run the phase 3. So some things will happen simultaneously, which you don't normally do. but we'll have to do that to meet that period. 12 months is probably when we'd have vaccine available for frontline people like hospital staff, police, all our frontline emergency services. 18 months is more likely when we'll have it for the general public.
Yep.
Bill Gates has announced that he is actually going to create 7 factories today. Wow. On the basis that they will be able to cope with new technologies as well. And he would only expect that 1 or 2 of them will get used. So 5 of them won't get used. But he says we need to spend billions of dollars today as an insurance to make sure we do have a vaccine available in the shortest possible time.
That's great news. And it gives heart for business to know that there is something out there, albeit a distant horizon. It's not decades.
Yeah, so let's talk about what is coming faster. So firstly, one of the things that's been happening in the background, led by the chief scientist, Alan Finkel, is really sovereign capability. So they've been gearing up to make sure we have as many respirators, hand sanitizers, masks. So that's a lot of happening, is make sure we can make these things in Australia. All your favorite gin companies are now making hand sanitizer, because obviously alcohol is the major component of a hand sanitizer. So you can buy your favorite gin, but this time it'll have a hand sanitizer in it. So that's actually happened already. So that piece. The other thing that's happening is that we are screening all known drugs for antiviral activity. And that's where you've heard a few announcements about some anti-malarial drugs, some antiparasitic drugs showing promise. That's fantastic if they work, but we must do the safety and dose studies in humans. We had some early premature announcements by someone in the States, and that actually led to a couple of deaths because people suddenly went to their medicine cabinet and said, I've got that drug, I'll scoff it down. And of course, like most drugs, you cannot overdose. So we've got to get that safety, but we can do it pretty quickly. So we're going to have antivirals. That's going to save people from dying.
Yeah.
The other one we're going to have is passive antibody therapy. We're lucky. We've got in CSL one of the best in the world for making passive antibodies. This is where you take serum from people who've recovered, you take out their antibodies, you inactivate any virus so there's no potential to infect people, and you give that. That's going to save lives. CSL's already announced a major international collaboration because we don't have enough recovered people in Australia today.
Yeah.
So those two, antiviral therapy and passive antibodies, are going to come within months, and they're going to save lives. So the people who are infected, who are struggling, particularly some of those who might be a bit compromised and might not make it otherwise, that's where we're going to use that therapy.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a bit about the curve and the flattening of the curve, and you introduced that. We saw the modelling released by the federal government yesterday. And again, it just continues the transparency that both the state government and the federal government are sharing with us. And I think that enabled us to be even more confident in the steps that they're taking. But what were the insights that you took out of that modelling yesterday?
Well, the first one is that we brought that new infection rate down. That's the key indicator that we're looking at. We'll drive that down harder because, as I said, so we've come in 2 weeks, we've come from 25% down to 3%. We need to drive that down to 0. That doesn't mean that that the virus is disappeared from Australia. The delicate issue for the government is at what stage do we start to relax the movement restrictions? At the same time, making sure that we don't get massive new infection, because the virus is still going to be around. That's where the epidemiologists come in. They can, what we'll be doing is we'll be tracking where the hotspots are, and we'll be throwing everything at hotspots. So that's the basis of disease control. Find out where the infection is and keep those people away from the rest of the population. Because remember, that's the thing about these new viruses. The population is completely naive, completely susceptible. Fortunately, only in Australia, if you look at the mortality rate, it's under 1%. So that's good. That's some good news. And the other thing we got a bit lucky on is this isn't really impacting young children, which is what we would have predicted. And we've been expecting this for probably 2 decades, a new pandemic.
Okay.
If you want to watch a good video, have a look at Bill Gates' 2015 TED Talk. He talks about what a new pandemic would look like. And this mirrors it pretty quite closely. New pathogen, crossed over from animals, rapidly spread around the world within 48 hours of modern transport, naive populations, no vaccine available. That's what we've got. Respiratory spread because you don't need intimate contact. It matches. So it's a sort of down to earth, pretty good TED talk, and he did. So we knew that something like this would come. Obviously, we don't build our hospital systems for the worst possible scenarios. But fortunately, we have a lot of people out there who are trained in disease control. And I've got a lot of confidence in people like Brendan Murphy. I think you can trust what Brendan's saying. I think, we've got some great researchers. You look at Sharon Lewin from the Doherty Institute, very measured, good team of people there. And we've got other people like that around Australia. So we're in a good position to help as part of that international effort. We probably won't see the first vaccine manufactured in Australia because we've only got one vaccine manufacturer, and that's CSL. And they're flat out making flu because, again, if everyone, what we're talking about is please go and get your flu shot because we don't want to have flu confusing diagnosis as we come into winter. So that's another thing. Please go out and get your flu shot. It will help a lot.
So social distancing and flu shot. Paul, I want to shift gears a little bit. You've given a great explanation of the virus and what we've seen. I'd like to shift forward and start to give businesses something that they can start thinking about and the signs that they can expect around when we can start operating again, and then move into returning to normal, what that would look like. So let's start with the first piece there. What are the signals that we should start looking for? And you mentioned hotspots and, there's some good news around vaccine, but in your eyes, what should we be looking out for?
We're going to do a lot more testing. So that's the other thing we're gearing up for now. Now we're through this sort of immediate crisis. We need to do a lot more testing. And I'm going to guess that testing is going to be part of the protocol when we start having people move. And that's not just testing infected people. It's testing other high-risk groups. All the staff there today and I want to thank them, the people who are out there in the supermarkets serving people, the police are out there. I mean, these people are putting themselves at risk. And so, we'll be probably starting to test all of those people. Most of them will be negative, but that's great. We just need to make sure anyone who is positive, and we'll be using antibody-based tests because they're faster and they're cheaper. So we'll do a lot more testing. That's going to give people a confidence, and of course, we're also going to show asymptomatic people, in other words, people who are infected but aren't showing any signs. They don't know they've got the infection, but they can still be spreading. So the sooner we find them, isolate them, most of them are isolated at home unless they develop, severe clinical conditions. So testing is going to be part of that. It's yet to be seen how fast we can ramp up mass testing. That's going to give people a lot more confidence about getting people back to work, but also to important social interaction. Those of us who haven't seen elderly parents who can't go and visit someone in the hospital, those things, getting our schools back, so testing is going to be part of it. I think we've moved people to a new view of social interaction that says, let's, even when we start moving, let's not be hugging and kissing for a while, guys. It's let's just ease back into it and think about where we're at. So the biggest signals to people will be that we get that rate of new infections right down, okay? And then monitor what happens. Where are the hot spots? Why is it happening? We stopped that introduction of people bringing it in from overseas, which was where it started. They'll have to think at some stage, what does it mean for someone to come back into Australia now? If people have to quarantine for 14 days, they're not going to come here for a holiday. So we might test people back into the country.
Which would help that transmission from offshore. So really, we're looking out for the hotspots, flares, and we're looking for that community transmission to come down. we get through this, and I know you've already started thinking about how do we give confidence for employees and business owners alike that it is safe to come back to work. But perhaps give us some insight into the type of things that you're thinking about that will give business owners and employees the confidence that it is okay to come back to work.
All right, so the first thing is we can't wait till we have a vaccine. You know, I don't think anyone feels that we can be shut down like we are for another 12 to 18 months.
Yep.
And the government, I'm sure, will be thinking that way. So
that's exactly how they're thinking as our business owners.
Yeah.
We don't
So
want to be forever.
When we open up, at the moment it varies a bit in Australia, but most people are saying, look, we expect to be shut down until the end of June. Okay. In some areas, we might be able to ease up if we're not seeing any infection in some zones. So that's probably realistic. But let's hope after June, we can actually start. But that's when some level of increased testing has to be part of that. We can't just open up and do nothing. We will have the antivirals and the passive immunoglobulin to help us get that mortality rate down. So, you know, no one wants to see elderly people suffering the way they are. Yeah. So we will drop that mortality rate even further because we'll have better tools. You know, the clinical professionals been doing a fantastic job out there now, but we'll give them a few more tools. Yeah. And that's really important. But we'll have to look at testing. You've seen reports the government's buying in overseas diagnostic kits, millions of these. We'll look at sovereign capability within Australia as well. We have some Australian companies as well who are gearing to do this. Yeah. So that's part of, I think, what people will be starting to model now. If we can relax the movement restrictions in a couple of months, how fast can we get these other measures in place, and how might we use them? I'm going to guess internationally we'll see the return of some sort of health passport. Those of us who are over 60 can remember in the 70s, I travelled with a health passport. It said I'd been vaccinated with smallpox, cholera, yellow fever. Now it's probably going to say I've been tested and I am negative to COVID-19. But it has to be from a reputed authority. It can't be someone testing at home. It's going to have that, government stamp on it. So that's going to be helping us with people coming, potentially could bring the virus back into Australia. But something like that also might work locally. But we've got to work out all the issues. We've got to understand, what does that mean? Who gives the approval? How do we track it? And I'm going to guess that that's the sort of thing that Canberra's working on.
So, Paul, in your view, there will be a testing regime that will come through eventually, but we won't see an easing until the hotspots dampen out. And to do that, we've got to stop the community transmission. Anne Wright, our head of marketing communications, is online. And Paul, I know you're open to a couple of questions in the time left before we wrap. And has any questions come through for Paul?
Yes, it's funny you should just ask that. So Peter just asked something on our chat board now, and it was in line with that testing that you were just speaking about. So we're reading about that very high level of testing in South Korea. So what does Australia need to do, or is Australia pursuing a more aggressive testing regime? What does that look like? What does that mean? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have been testing a lot more asymptomatics. We're probably closer to Korea in our testing. I think the figures I tell you, we've probably tested about 300,000 tests at the moment. Remember, they're different tests. So most of the testing at the moment has been about testing for the virus using modern technology like PCR. I won't go into what it is, but modern sort of tests that detects whether you have the virus. What we're going to move into is a lot more of these quick tests that test for antibody. What they can tell you is, have you been exposed? Maybe even if you're immune. But remember, only about 2% of the people we're testing are positive. So the vast majority of people are still going to be negative. And we've got to decide what do we do, because a negative person is still a susceptible person. Mm. So it's gearing up and understanding how many products, how many kits we've got out there. If I've got several million, how do I prioritize that testing? And my guess, it's got to be frontline at the moment.
And we've probably got time for one more if there's one more there.
Yes, Kylie has sent through a question. Now, unfortunately, Kylie has spent 30 hours after emergency surgery. She just wants to know and she was in Dandenong Hospital. The nurses didn't have masks or gloves. Now, I know we've read a lot about the PPE, the personal protective equipment, and the shortage of those coming into hospitals. What's the chance of contracting COVID-19 whilst you're a patient in the hospital? What kind of concern should we have about that lack of PPE equipment?
Look, I think the comment I made earlier about gearing up. So we're gearing up to make more PPE equipment in Australia, and they'll be starting to roll that out. Hospitals, we've always known that hospitals aren't a great place in a sense. You know, that's where we take sick people. Not surprising, the chances of getting something in a hospital is greater than it is generally in the general public. So, you know, that's why we're seeing people being discharged faster than they might have normally been. We've sort of been talking about particularly women having children. They're trying to get them out of the hospitals as fast as possible. So, yeah, there's always an increased risk. You know, I think the hospitals are doing a fantastic job under very testing conditions. And we do need to make sure we get that crippling. Obviously, during surgery, people do have all of the protective. So, you know, when someone's operating on you, you know, be rest assured that they have all the gear that they would normally have. It's just that nurse who's doing ward duty at the moment. You know, we are having to reserve the mask, and not every mask is equal. That's the other thing to understand. So those sort of, you know, P95 masks are the ones that are the really good ones, and you know, we're having to ration them a bit at the moment. But, you know, things are changing both from an import point of view, but also from a local manufacturer. And I'm sure you'll see announcements shortly about what's happening. I think there's been some announcements. There's a factory in Victoria now that's making respirators, for instance.
Great news. Paul, we're running out of time, but I would like you to leave us. You know, I think the newspapers have been valuable in terms of the information they're putting out, and largely accurate as well. But where do you go to find the latest health and advice regarding the restrictions?
Yeah, look, I think go to the federal government site. I think they're trying to collate everything in there and have one source of information that can tell you about what's actually happening state by state, day by day. Definitely that. If you want to get into details, I think places like the Doherty Institute, go and have a look at their website. They're getting into more detail on some of the science that's happening in the labs. International WHO is always a good site. The Gates Foundation, again, is a reliable site. Just be careful about your social media. There's a lot of crap, let's be honest, out there being circulated around protection about things to do and don't on social media. So, and sometimes they purport that it's come from a reliable source. Go to the primary source. Don't rely. If they quote a primary source, you go and have a look at that primary source and check it out yourself.
Brilliant, Paul. And I know you're available for questions offline as well. And
Happy to.
Anyone that has a question, just keep emailing them in. We'll get them to Paul, and we'll publish the FAQs out of this session along with the whole webinar, which you'll be able to download as well. I told you he was good, Paul. I really appreciate your time to talk to Victorian business today.
No, I appreciate it. And I thank to everyone who's out there working today. You know, we're at home, but there's a lot of people out there working, and thank you.
So with that brings an end to today's webinar. Big thank you, and I'll join the chorus that Paul's put out there to all the members and businesses across Victoria that have been able to join us today. I really hope this information has been useful to you. And as I said before, you will be able to download it, so share it far and wide. Of course, if you need any assistance, either the website that Paul's spoken about, equally come to the victorianchamber.com.au and the state government website business.vic.gov.au. Next week, we'll be talking to 4 Pillars, the distillery that has changed its operation from making the gin they are famous for to producing much needed hand sanitizer, not only at normal grade, but at health grade as well. We'll be talking about how business can start thinking about how they'll resume operating in a different environment to what they used to. Of course, 4 Pillars have done that. And there'll be examples that will come through that you'll have heard of, and hopefully it starts to stimulate your business in terms of what might be next. We thank you, our members that have joined us today, but equally those that aren't a member, go to the Victorian Chamber website and sign up. It's free. We've waived the membership because we want to make sure that you have access to the resources you need to get through at this point in time. Thanks again. Have a very safe Easter, and I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. Thank you.